Welcome back to Shiurim and Piyyut. We're now up to the Meshallesh, the third piyyut in the Kedushta Uyamti B'chil Kippur for the first day of Sukkot. We already dealt with in the first two Shiurim the earlier components of this Kedushta. We dealt with the Magen in the first bracha, Magen Abraham, and we dealt with the Meḥayyé in the second bracha, Meḥayyé Ametim. Now we're in the third bracha. The Chazan is finished saying Baruch Ata Hashem Meḥayyé Ametim, the end of the second bracha. And now where are we? The third bracha should be Kedusha. So Meshallesh, as we've mentioned in previous shiurim, means the tripled, the trebled. Well, it's the third component in the third bracha. It's also the bracha that contains the Kedusha, which has the threefold Kadosh, 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 holy, holy, holy. So, when the Chazan has finished Meḥayyé Ametim, do we go straight into the text of the Kedusha? No. We have this piyyut, and indeed it'll be a long sequence of piyyutim before we finally get to the text of the Kedusha itself, the Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. So immediately after the Chazan has finished the words Baruch Ata Hashem Meḥayyé Ametim, the continuation is with this Meshallesh, kosht שעינת. This is true both in the original way that the Kedushta was recited, in which the Meḥayyé, the second component, completely replaced the text of the second bracha and left only the Chatima, the conclusion, Baruch Ata Hashem Meḥayyé Ametim. But it's also true in the current way, the way it was practiced in Ashkenaz and in contemporary Ashkenazic synagogues, that the second bracha is said in its entirety, in its regular text, Ata Gibor La'olam Hashem, and then only when the Chazan reaches V'ne'emar Ata L'Hayot Meitim is the continuation with the bracha. Either way, in the third bracha, the Chazan does not start with the text of the bracha, because ultimately all these piyyutim are going to lead into Kedusha, but rather go straight into the text of Meshallesh. Okay? We'll see here. This piyyut itself will not get us directly to the Kedusha. It'll take us at least 5 more piyyutim before we get there. This piyyut is indeed a continuation of the previous ones. The alphabetical acrostic here continues that from the Magen, which had Aleph through Lamed, and the Meḥayyé, which had Mem through Tzadi. But as the letters of the alphabet run out even more, there are only 4 letters left, Kuf, Resh, Shin, Tav. So instead of making 1 per line, or 1 per every 2 lines, the Paitan has only 1 per stanza. You can see here, Kuf, Resh, Shin, Tav. We talked about this, about why it's called Meshallesh, or the third bracha, and it's the trebling of holy, holy, holy. So in the Amsterdam Machzor, which is from mid-13th century Cologne, it's housed in Amsterdam, has been housed in Amsterdam for the last couple hundred years, hence the name of the manuscript, the current name of the manuscript. And you see here, the line leads you right after Meḥayyé Ametim, above the red line, you see kosht שעינת Kuf, and the next stanza, Reish, Revavot, Rivot, Shavua in the next one, and Toledot, Sarir Tavid, and then we have our chain of verses, or as we had in the previous piyyutim, with the twist, which we'll see later. Another manuscript from the British Library, you can see the Kuf here, Kosht, and then 1, 2, 3, 4 lines, the second word, Rivavot, that's the Reish, and then in this, the 2 lines later, the second word, Sheva, 2 lines later, Toldot, and then the verses, the psukim. And here I've set it out for you very clearly typed up. Kosht שעינת עץ, לעומס ספרי עץ, זכרנה להיבה עץ, ותשועה ברוב יועץ. רבבות שא סוכותה, בלוד סכונם הסקתה, בנשק לראשם סקותה, ומענף להקם חסכתה. שבוע משי סיככתם, Ba'aninat heres sibavtam, sochachtam, ta'uka hedek min mesuchatam, b'chein rushifa sukkatam. Todot seir ta'avid, gevir levilti laha'avid, ta'apedenu ka'azravid, b'komamach sukkat David. Okay. We're going to shift the focus here. The two piyyutim that we've seen so far focused entirely on lulav and hardly mentioned sukkah. I think in the Magen there was definitely no reference to sukkah. I think in the Meḥayyé there was one reference. Yes, Meshallesh sukkah shiv'at. It referred to the Jewish people as those who observe the sukkah for 7 days. Just in the context of mentioning other commandments of the holiday, certainly did not focus on the sukkah. But now in this piyut, we are going to focus on the sukkah. That is going to be the point of this piyut. However, not the literal sukkah. Let's look. The verse commanding the dwelling in Sukkot in the Torah, so that your generations may know that I had the Israelites dwell in Sukkot when I took them out of the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. When is this referring to? When, either at the time directly of exiting Egypt or during the 40 years in the wanderings outside of Egypt, did God have the Israelites dwell in anything called a sukkah? They dwelt in tents, ohalim. But what is this Sukkot? So, in the Sifra, halachic midrash on the book of Leviticus, from the time of the Tanaim, book of Vayikra, you have Rabbi Akiva Omer b'Sukkot ananei chavod hayu. Rabbi Akiva says they were in the booths, the Sukkot of the clouds of glory. There is another opinion given in the midrash that it's Sukkot mamash, actual Sukkot, whatever that means. I mean, it would seem to mean actual huts, but when would that have been, given that we know they dwelt in tents? Maybe a tent and a sukkah are somehow synonyms. But here, Rabbi Akiva is saying, no, it's the Sukkot of the clouds of glory. What on earth does that mean? The Ananei HaKavod are the clouds of glory. This looks like it's a semichut te'ur, a construct of description, such that clouds of glory, the word of glory comes functions effectively as the way an English adjective would, meaning glorious clouds. But there's something really much more going on here. The word kavod, certainly in the Bible and somewhat in subsequent Jewish literature, has a much further meaning. So we're dealing with the clouds of glory, we're dealing with the clouds of the kavod. Let's look at that word in the Torah. As soon as the Israelites left Ramesses in Egypt, they went to Sukkot. You can read this as they went from Ramesses into booths, though that does not seem to be the meaning. It's because the contextual meaning seems to be they went from a place called Ramesses to a place called Sukkot. Why is the place called Sukkot? Maybe there were booths there, huts there. You can read the words as they went into Sukkot. But then we'd have to ask, what are Sukkot? So let's see. Sukkot. They traveled forth from Sukkot, and they dwelt in Etam at the edge of the wilderness. And the Lord was walking in front of them by day, ba'amud anan lanchotam haderech, in a pillar of cloud to guide them the way, and a pillar of fire at night, lalechet yomam, to give them illumination, lalechet yomam v'layla, to travel day and night. Lo yamish amud anan yomam. The pillar of cloud never departed. Lo yamish, by day, or the pillar of fire by night, from its place in front of the people. So there's this cloud here, and it says that God was walking ahead of them in the pillar of cloud. So the cloud is not just doesn't seem to be a protection, and it's not even just guidance of the way, not even a compass, a GPS, but God dwells in the cloud. Do we have further evidence of that? Let's see. Exodus 16:10. Vayhi gedaber Aharon el kol adat bnei Yisrael vayifnu al hamidbar v'hinei kavod Adonai nir'ah be'anan. Now it was when Aaron was speaking to the community of the Israelites that they turned to the wilderness, and look, the Lord's glory, kavod, had appeared in the cloud. The glory throughout is, and we'll see in other verses, it means the visible representation of God, what later gets called Shekhinah, the presence of God. In a sense, you could just translate V'nei kavod Hashem nir'ah be'anan, and look, God had appeared in the cloud. But we use what's called a hypostasis, some kind of extension of God's power, here representing God's presence, so that we can speak of it being in a particular place rather than everywhere. God's physical manifestation that could rest in one place was in the cloud. It's the clouds of Ananei HaKavod, the clouds of the Shekhinah, the clouds of where God is. Other verse. Okay, Moses ascends to the mountain, and Vaychas Ha'anan, the cloud covered the mountain. So before we had the imagery, the cloud is in front of the people guiding them. And in Exodus 16:10, the cloud was in a specific place, and everyone looked because, look, there's God. Now the cloud has rested on Mount Sinai, making Mount Sinai the locus of holiness. Vayishkon kavod Adonai al har Sinai vaychaseh ha'anan sheshet yamim vayikra el Moshe vayom hashvi'i mitoch ha'anan. The Lord's kavod became present. Vayishkon, it rested, it dwelled. This is the root of the noun Shekhinah, the dwelling, the resting. The kavod, it was what is shochen. So the word kavod in earlier Hebrew gets a synonym, Shekhinah in later Hebrew, became present on Mount Sinai. And the cloud covered it for 6 days. He called out to Moses on the 7th day from inside the cloud. So Moses enters the cloud. A verse after this, I didn't include that verse, but the appearance of the Lord's kavod, what did God's kavod look like? It was like an ish ochelet, a consuming fire at the top of the mountain. Sounds like the pillar of fire earlier. We got the pillar of fire and pillar of cloud. Where there, it said God was walking in the pillar of cloud and in the pillar of fire. Didn't give further details. Here it's describing, it says that it didn't use the word kavod there, but here it says the appearance of God's kavod, of the physical manifestation of God, of the Shekhinah, was like a fire at the top of the mountain. And God was dwelling God's kavod was dwelling on the mountain, and there was cloud covering it. But Mount Sinai isn't forever. Eventually they have to travel forth. There's going to be a Mishkan, a tabernacle, a portable temple. So what's the verse? What is Moses told when he goes up into that cloud? That was the very end of Exodus 24, beginning of Exodus 25. Vasuli mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham. They shall make me a mikdash, a holy site, a temple, and I shall be present in their midst. Again, that verb, shachan, the root of Shekhinah, in the temple at this point, and in the Mishkan as it travels. And then finally, the end of the book of Exodus, the Mishkan is built. And what do we see there? The cloud covered the tent of meeting, the Ohel Moed, which here is another term for the Mishkan. And the Lord's kavod filled the Mishkan, filled the tabernacle. The representation of the kavod is that cloud covering the temple. And Moses was unable to enter the tent of meeting because the cloud was present above it. The cloud was dwelling above it, and the Lord's kavod was filling the tabernacle. The representation of that God is there in it is the cloud. So Ananei Kavod is the clouds of the Kavod, the clouds of the Shekhinah, of the divine presence, which first were in front of the people leading them. Then they were on Mount Sinai, when that was the locus of holiness. And then the locus of holiness can now be portable, can be taken from Mount Sinai and moved on in all their wanderings. So that further, unlike in Exodus 16:10, when the people looked and God's Kavod appeared in the cloud over the wilderness, they turned to the wilderness and look, God's Kavod was in the cloud. Now, after the Mishkan has been built, when the community thronged around Moses and Aaron, they turned to the Mishkan, the Ohel Moed, and look, the cloud was covering it, and the Lord's Kavod appeared in it. Okay, so much for the wilderness wanderings in the Torah. Are there other references to Sukkah as cloud, as the divine Kavod elsewhere in Tanakh? Because here, so far, we haven't directly seen Sukkah connected to them. We saw that the clouds first appeared after the Israelites went forth from a place called Sukkot. That seems to be a place name. We saw there's the commandment to dwell in Sukkot because God had the Israelites dwell in Sukkot. We've not yet seen a direct connection, though, to the Anan and the Kavod, or the Ananei HaKavod. Let's look here in Isaiah. Uvara Adonai al kol mechon har Tzion v'al mikra'eh ha'anan yomam v'ashan v'noga ish lehava layla ki al kol kavod chuppah. God will create in the Messianic future over every home. Is it human habitation or is it temple? But there is only one temple in Jerusalem. Maybe it's over the whole temple of Jerusalem, the divine home, and all its meeting places, cloud by day and smoke, and a glowing flaming fire by night. For over every glory will be a chuppah, a canopy. Over every, don't know exactly how to translate this, is that over every place of God's dwelling where God's kavod is, or is this out of every home? Because the previous verses were talking about how after great destruction and tragedy, then those that survive in Jerusalem will be in a very happy situation. Is it talking about their homes? It seems to, and it says the sukkah. Here's that word. First time we've seen sukkah associated directly with anan and kavod, even though it's not directly God's kavod. The sukkah will be for shade by day, protecting from fierce heat, and a protection and refuge from storm and rain. But what is the sukkah? Again, not a literal sukkah. It seems to be, it's this cloud hovering over them. The temple itself was also called a sukkah. The temple being the successor to the Mishkan, the place where the holy ark and the other Klei HaKodesh, the other holy vessels are housed, was the Mishkan, and then the temple, and it is called a sukkah. Vayhi v'shalem sukkah ma'unato v'tzion. His sukkah was in Salem, it's Jerusalem, and his lair in Zion. There's one more verse. Amos 9:11. Bayom hahu akim et sukkat David hanofelet v'gadarti et pirtzeyen v'arisotav akim uvniti hakimei olam. On that day I will restore the fallen sukkah of David. I will repair its breaches, and I will erect its harisot, its ruins, and I'll rebuild it just as long ago. This cannot be the temple in its original context. When the prophet Amos was prophesying, the temple was standing. There were kings from the Davidic line sitting on the throne in the southern kingdom, although he lived in the north. It may be, as many of the Rishonim, many of the medieval Jewish commentators explain, that it means the Sukkat David is the over-encompassing the kingdom of the south, including the north. It is sochech, it covers over the whole north, and that Sukkot David is the full extent of the Davidic kingdom. I will rebuild that. Maybe it refers to the state of things under David, when things were good, before moral decay and collapse, before war and poverty kicked in. But later on, certainly, Sukkot David gets understood as the temple. So now we're ready to read the piyut. Kosht she'inat eitz. The kosht means truth, but here faithfulness. Emet in Hebrew, chesed ve'emet. The two words together can mean constancy, faithfulness. Not necessarily acts of kindness and truth, but again, faithfulness, reliability. So the faithfulness of she'inat eitz, of lie down, stretch out, lean, relax under the tree. La'om seifri eitz, for the Jewish people who bear the fruit of the tree. Zechorna lehiva, remember that faithfulness, that faithful act of relax under the tree. What? What is this talking about? She'inat eitz, relax under the tree. V'hishanu tachat ha'etz, and relax under the tree. It's something that Abraham says to the angels when they come visit. Have a bit of water brought over and wash your feet. V'hishanu tachat ha'etz, and relax under the tree. Says in the Tosefta Sota 4.2. This appears elsewhere, also in the Mechilta. You find regarding Abraham that in accordance with what he gave to the angels, such things in such measure was given to him for his descendants. Regarding Abraham, it says that he said, lean under the tree, relax under the tree. So, God gave his children 7 clouds of the kavod in the wilderness, which give shade, like the tree, to the angels. One on their right and one on their left. One in front and one in the back. One above their heads. One is the divine presence in their midst. So there's one cloud, at least according to this, which is the cloud where God is resting. That's the cloud of the kavod, cloud of the Shekhinah. And the others are ananei hakavod, the clouds of the kavod, v'amud anan, and the pillar of cloud that went in front of them. We didn't really see this in the Torah. We didn't see multiple clouds, but here there's this whole, if you've got 4 clouds on all sides and one on top, that's sort of the image of a sukkah. There's one in their midst, which is that cloud of the Shekhinah, and then one in front of them, the one the Torah spoke about. Okay, so the faithfulness that Abraham said, Yishanu tachat ha'etz, of relax under the tree, la'om seifri eitz, for the Jewish people who bear the fruit of the tree. That's the etrog. I thought we weren't going to talk about the 4 species. We weren't going to talk about the lulav. Well, we're not. This is an epithet for the Jewish people. Might as well have said, Kosht she'inat eitz li Yisrael. Remember it for the Jewish people. But piyyutim love, paitanim love epithets. It's one of the building blocks of piyut. Also, he has this rhyme. In fact, it's a perfect rhyme. It's the same word. That's considered totally acceptable in Hebrew poetry. I know in English poetry, they say, don't rhyme with the same word. But here in Hebrew poetry, if you can make a point with it, here it's connecting the eights and the eights and the eights, the tree and the tree. Remember, please, to take counsel. And success in a multitude of counselors. So the first two lines, as we said, the first line was referring to Abraham, and we understand the word zachor in the third line. Remember Abraham's act of kindness, act of faithfulness for Israel. The continuation is difficult. What's going on? Okay, the last line, is from a verse. Bein tahbolot yipol am utshu'a berov yo'etz. With no plans, the nation will fall, but success lies in a multitude of counselors. Seems somehow to be saying, give us success, give us victory in the merit of Abraham. But the words are really a puzzle. And what this line from Mishlei, this line from Proverbs, it's wrong here. It's not Genesis 18:4. That's from the previous line. 14. But let's anyway turn this into a slideshow. It's telling you that if you have no plans, you'll fail. If you have plans, if you have counselors, then things will be good. You'll have success. What's that doing here? So I turned to manuscript commentaries on this piyut. They all talked about the kosht she'inat eitz, and they explained the reference to Abraham, who told the angels, relax under the tree, hisha'anu tachat ha'etz. And they all mentioned the midrash, that it's in the merit of Abraham that God gave the Israelites the ananei kavod, the clouds of the kavod. But these other lines, which don't seem to refer to any midrash, the commentators seem to think, didn't need comment. Either that, or they had difficulty understanding themselves, and therefore didn't have to say anything. When you're writing a commentary, you can simply comment on the words that you want to, and you can leave it up to the reader to assume that the reader will know the others. If the reader doesn't understand, then you can say, well, it's not my fault. You didn't understand. You should have understood, without truly revealing that you yourself don't understand. You can't do that in a translation. In a translation, you must translate every word. So all these manuscript commentaries, Nuremberg, the Tripartite, Parma 3205, Kaufman 411, Hamburg Codex Hebraica 17.2, Parma 1264, nothing. You can see here. Kosht she'inat eitz. See in the right-hand column, the second illuminated word, kosht she'inat eitz. Zechuto shel Avram, the merit of Abraham, shne'amar bo v'yisha'anu tachat ha'etz, about whom it is said, and relax under the tree. The very next line, Shavua Meshi Sikachtam, that is 2 stanzas later. So it's not dealing at all with this line. Here too, the Tripartite Machzor, Kosht she'inat eitz, the first paragraph break in the commentary on the right. And you see in big letters, Kosht she'inat eitz down here in the central column, where I have the cursor, if you can see that. But here, you have kosht she'inat eitz, Zechuto, the Yoshro shel Abraham, Abraham's merit and uprightness, Shenemar v'yisha'anu tachat ha'etz. Tizkor liYisrael, you should remember for the Jewish people, Sha'al Masim v'to'anin pri eitz, who bear and carry the fruit of the tree, the etrog. And the very next things, Rivavot sa sukkota. That's the next stanza. So it does not comment all on the remainder of this stanza. Where am I finding all these commentaries? How do I know how to look into manuscripts and find these commentaries? Well, Elizabeth Hollander wrote an enormous catalog, a clavis commentariorum of Hebrew literary poetry in manuscript. The key of commentaries, Hebrew liturgical, of commentaries on Hebrew liturgical poetry in manuscript. She sat for years looking at microfilms in the National Library in Israel, the Institute for Manuscript for IMHM, the Institute for Microfilmed Hebrew Manuscripts. And she wrote down each manuscript that has a commentary with it on a given piyut. So if you look up Kosht she'inat eitz, all the numbers begin with 160, which seems to be the code for this piyut, and then it goes on 05, 06, 07, 08, 09, 010, and gives you all these. You can look up each of these. Now notice that some of these manuscripts are simply standalone works. The commentary is the book. See here, there's no text of the piyut here. Others, you see here, there's a machzor in the middle, and the commentary is in the margin. She also wrote a book called Piyut's Commentary in Medieval Ashkenaz, where she discusses the whole phenomenon. It's a compilatory phenomenon. While we do have commentaries on individual piyutim, many individual piyutim, which are attributed to a given author, we have them typically within the context. They're transmitted in a compilatory commentary. So you'll have a manuscript, and let's say there's a machzor in the center, and in the margins there's commentary. And the commentary doesn't have a specific author, it's a compilation. But sometimes on a given piyut, it'll tell you this commentary is by this author. The whole phenomenon of Piyut's commentary really starts in northern France in the late 11th century with students of Rashi who studied with Rashi. Rashi himself did not write commentaries on Piyyutim, but various of his students did. Rashi, of course, began the process of writing Hebrew commentaries on the Bible. And, of course, he wrote voluminous commentaries on the Talmud. So this is continuing that practice on Piyyutim, and you get commentaries so late 11th century France, 12th century, 13th century Rhineland. That's the period. And then we have printed commentaries. So let's look. The first two printed editions of the Ashkenazic Machzor are in Salonika, in what is now Greece, then the Ottoman Empire in 1555, and Sabionetta in Italy in 1557. So they give the same commentary on this line. Zechorna lehiva'etz, remember please to take counsel. Lehiva'etz lasiam etzah tova, to advise them good counsel. So in the merit of Abraham, we want you to give us good advice. Okay, I mean, it makes some sense. It's a little odd. We're asking God for advice. But also, lehiva'etz doesn't mean to give advice. It means usually to consult advice or to make a plan. Not to give counsel, but to take counsel. Here, the orange up here, you can see in the Saloniki 1555, first printed Ashkenazic Machzor, you have the line and in the blue I've circled the words in the commentary. It's rather hard to read, and you see they used more or less the same font that they used for the Pesukim after the Meshallesh here, where it says Kakatuv after Bekom Machsukat David in the center. It's a little hard to see what's commentary, what's what, but you see Lehiva'etz lahasiam etzah tova. In the second Machzor, 2 years later on Sabionetta in 1557, the commentary already is in a cursive font, what we call Rashi script. Makes it much clearer to see what is text and what is commentary. What about Hadrat Kodesh? That's a Machzor from not 50 years later, but over 40 years later, whose commentary and instructions were very, very influential in subsequent Machzorim. So there it says, Zechorna lehiva'etz, perush lehiva'etz alehem etzah, to take counsel regarding them, to plan counsel regarding them. Umahi ha'etzah, tushia. What is the counsel? Tishua. What is the counsel? Success. It's not so much to take counsel, and certainly not to give counsel, but plan counsel. Make good, remember Abraham's merit, to plan good things for the Jewish people, to plan for them counsel. Now, none of this really explained what's Tishu'ah, Barovio 8. It's a verse from Proverbs, but these commentaries neither gave you the biblical reference. They didn't say, Pasuku b'mishlei, it is a verse from Proverbs, nor did they tell you what it might mean here in context. Here in Wolf Heidenheim's important, influential commentary in the early 19th century, I'm copying this from the 1815 printing. I think there were printings as early as 1805, maybe even 1800 of the Sukkot Machzor. But it says here, to take counsel or a planned counsel regarding them, a counsel, to counsel a counsel, to take counsel of a counsel, a cognate accusative, just as in English, we could say to plan a plan, and success in a multitude of counselors. He simply throws the last words of the stanza, which are the words from that verse, into his sentence, but doesn't really explain what that means. Of course, you see in the law in the stanza we talked about rhyme. We have two eitz, tree, and lihiva eitz, your eitz, counsel. So two different roots for words with that identical syllable eitz. And again, no pun intended. Roots. Yes, I know trees have roots. In Daniel Goldschmidt's commentary, the first really scientific edition of the Machzor in Jerusalem, 1981. Zechorna lehiva eitz. Remember, please, lehiva eitz. Take counsel lefoktam be'etzah tova, to visit upon them good counsel, to make your good counsel apply to them. So this seems more to, it's not to advise them, but really, to plan good plans for them, as we saw in the Hadrat Kodesh. He references the verse in Proverbs, and he actually gives you two verses in Proverbs because the identical phrase appears in both. Apparently meaning to give them opportunity, to give them success through much counsel. Problem is, yoetz doesn't mean counsel. Yoetz means counselor. Eitzah means counsel. Yoetz is one who gives counsel. What's this multitude of counselors or multitude of a counselor? As I said, yoetz means counselor. This is difficult here to say. It just means, and give them success by giving them great counsel or great planage. So in the Master Communion, Bimpol and Ungarin Meren in Prague, 1791, and I have to thank Professor Shulamit Elitzur for directing me to this Machzor, for allowing me to use her unpublished commentary, which directs to this Machzor. I probably would not have found it. Lehiva eitz, l'hasiam eitzah tova, to advise good counsel. Again, as we saw in those early printed Ashkenazic Machzorim, sheyimtzeu teshuah barov yoetz, so that they should find success in a multitude of counselor. Barov eitzot shemiatzim lekayem mitzvot, through all their many plans, their many plans, preparation, counsels to plan to fulfill the commandments. Again, yoetz doesn't mean a plan or a counsel, it means a counselor, one who plans. It's a little odd to call the commandments the yoetz, the fulfillment of mitzvot. V'yesh mefarshim shetiyeh lahem teshuah b'shem shehu gadol ha'etzah. Some explain they should have success through God, who is the one great in counselor. So that works. Yoetz is a counsel, great. And they'll have success through the one. Rov yoetz seems to be a multiplicity of counselors, but it could also be a greatness of counselor, the one who counsels, maybe the Rav yoetz, one who counsels greatness, or counsels the Rov yoetz, who counsels a multitude, who counsels many things. So success through God. Alternatively, Professor Elitzur suggests in her commentary that teshuah barov yoetz means through a multitude of counselors are the sages. The sages who teach Torah, give great counsel to the people. May they have success through them. In any event, these two lines are difficult, and they don't seem to allude to some midrash, though perhaps we just haven't found it. And therefore, they're not exciting for the commentaries. I can't say, oh, look, this is referring to this story about Abraham, as the first two lines were. And therefore, it's easy to overlook them, but we see they're actually quite difficult. And I wanted to dwell on that. And I've given you a multitude of, I've given you much counsel of how to read them. We're in the second stanza. Revavot sa sukkota, belud tzikonam hisketa, beneshek l'rosham sakota, ume enef la'akam hasachta. Note the rhyme here. So, yes, according to the very basic rules of Hebrew rhyme, you have ta, 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 or tha, 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 ta. At the end of each line, and this rhymes. But that is completely a chariza diktukit. It is totally a grammatical rhyme. The ta is simply the you did X, the second person singular, thou didst X, the second singular perfect grammatical ending. And therefore it takes no great skill to make a rhyme like that. So in such instances, what we call Kalirian rhyme, because Rabbi Elazar Berbi Kilir would write this way, not always, depends on the style and the kind of piyut he's working on, but he certainly does this a lot. We'll say, okay, if the last syllable is not a great rhyme, let's enrich in the rhyme with two root consonants earlier. The two roots of the consonants you have earlier is the samech and the kaf. In the first three, no, in the first and the third line, you actually it's the same root. Sukkota to sukkot and sakota from sachach to cover. It's actually the same root. Hisketa, you heated. We'll talk about in a moment, but it's not the same root, but it's got the same, begins with the same two letters. Sacha begins samach kaf. In the last one, sin samach, we know they're pronounced the same way, and hasachta means to spare. Which again is unrelated to the other roots, but it is conceptually in meaning there's a connection, because to cover over and to spare, they're both having to do with protect. So sukkota, isketa, sakota, hasachta. But what does rivavot sa sukkota? The myriads of the one who traveled to Sukkot, in Lud, you heeded their prayer. In weaponry, their heads you covered over. Ume enef, and from rage, lahakam, their community, you spared hasach. So the one who traveled to Sukkot, Yaakov nasa Sukkot, vayiven lo bayet, Jacob traveled to Sukkot, a place, and he built himself a house. And he made booths for his livestock. Therefore he called the place by the name Sukkot. So Rivavot, the myriads, a myriad is again the number 10,000. The myriads, the 10,000s of the one who traveled to Sukkot. So the descendants of the one who traveled to Sukkot. Again, we've got an epithet for the Jewish people. In Lud, wherever that is, we'll see in a moment, your prayer they heard. What's sa? Rivavot sa Sukkota. Sa is traveled. Nasa. Now, this is not random. We can't say, because I can say from nasa, I can just shorten to sa. That pashat, I can just shorten to shat. I can't just drop letters from words. It's not like English poetry. We can say beneath, neath, and just drop certain letters. No, there's a whole shita. There's a whole system behind this. We look at the conjugations of the verb nasa in the imperfect tense, the so-called future tense. Essa, tissa, yissa. The nun is not included there. The nun is absorbed into the samach, hence the dagation of the samach, hence it's not essa, but essa. So we see the way our conception of the root is, the root has three letters, nun, samach, ayin, and in the imperfect tense, the nun is dropped off. But that's a model, it's an abstraction. Rather than assuming the letters have been dropped, how about just treat the two letters sa as the whole root? And that's what the Paitanim do. So we've got that sa just becomes sa, it becomes another way of conjugating it, as if it were what they call a hollow root, which just has a first and last consonant, but no middle consonant, like kum, lakum, kam, lashuv, shav. So we have it as if it were lasua, sa. If you want to know more about the grammar of piyut, there's this book by the late Michael Rand, Introduction to the Grammar of Hebrew Poetry in Byzantine Palestine. There's also work in Hebrew, Yosef Yahalom's Sfat Hashir, and There are articles, but this is what is available in English. It's a highly technical book, but if you're ready for that, it will help you understand the systematic nature of what appear to be deviations from the Hebrew that you might know already in Piyut, showing that there's a system. It's not just arbitrary. Good. Rivavot Sa Sukkota, the descendants, the myriads of the one who traveled to Sukkot. So Jacob traveled to Sukkot. We saw that in the verse. But who also traveled to a place called Sukkot? We saw the Israelites when they left Egypt, right? And they dwelled, they encamped in Sukkot, and they dwelt, they Sukkot. They went forth from Sukkot, they went to Etam, and that's where they saw the clouds of the Kavod. The Israelites set forth from Ramesses to Sukkot. So is it not the descendants of, but Rivavot, the myriads who traveled to Sukkot? The problem is that the verb sa is in the singular. So it seems it's the descendants of an individual who traveled to Sukkot. You see, Rivavot is in the semichot, the myriads of, and Rivavot is in the absolute state, simply the myriads that traveled to Sukkot. Although certainly in the vocalization in Ashkenazic manuscripts, you see often they will keep the kamatz, the revavot, even in the smichot, even in the construct state. So revavot sasukota, which you see in some manuscripts, could mean either the myriads that traveled to Sukkot or the myriads of the one that traveled to Sukkot. But rivavot, the form on top, is an unambiguously semichot form. It can only mean the myriad descendants of the one that traveled to Sukkot. But in any event, we see both vocalizations. Do we have any evidence of which is right? Well, as we said, the verb sa, the singular. Now, Goldschmidt, in his Machzor, lists in the critical apparatus 3 manuscripts that he says do have the plural. They have rivavot kesa'u Sukkota, when the myriads, they traveled to Sukkot. He lists only 3 manuscripts like that. I was able to find one of the manuscripts online, and in that one manuscript, I found the page, and indeed, it did not have it in the plural. It did not say sa'u, kisa'u. It said exactly like all the manuscripts I've seen, it said sa. And the other 2 manuscripts, so that was a phantom. So that means he has 2 manuscripts that apparently have it in the plural. I have not been able to access those manuscripts, but I'm not sure those have it either. It could be it's a phantom reading, in which case, yes, it refers to Jacob who traveled to Sukkot, and then the Israelites are his descendants of the one who traveled to Sukkot. The Lud, Sukkot skate, and Lud, you hated their prayer. What is Lud? So the table of nations in Parashat Noah, after Noah and his wife and his sons' wives leave the Teva, they leave the ark. It lists all the various descendants, the 70 nations that descend from Noah. Mitzrayim yalad et ludim vet anamim vet lahavim vet naftuhim vet patrusim vet kasluhim, etc. Mitzrayim, that means Egypt, begat the Ludites, the Anamites, the Labites, the Naphtuhites, the Patrusites, the Kasluhites, from whom we shoot the Philistines, and the Kaphtorites. So what exactly are these peoples, which seem to be parts of the Egyptian people? So Lud certainly looks like the classical term Lydians. Lydia, Lud. Lydia, though, is in Asia Minor, is in the area that we now call Turkey. So Casuto writes, Umberto Casuto writes that apparently it is the Lydians who had some kind of political affiliation with Egypt. And they were at some period, they were under the dominion of Egypt, and therefore they're considered to be part of the Egyptian family. Egypt begat the Lydians. Now, by synecdoche can mean part standing for the whole, pars pro toto, or the whole standing for the part, totum pro parte. and can be used as an epithet in piyyutim. So these names of these nations that are subsets of Egypt get used as the pars pro toto kind of synecdoche, often by the Kiliri. So here, Belud, in Lud, what's Lud? The land of the Ludites. What are the Ludites? The Ludites are Egyptians, so we mean not specifically the Egyptian colony in Asia Minor of Lydia, but Egypt as a whole. In Egypt, in Lud, Sakonam Hisketa, you hated their prayer. What kind of word is that, Sakonam? Kunam, rather. We have a verse in Isaiah, Adonai, Batzar Pekaducha Tzakon Lahash Musarcha Alam. Oh Lord, in straits they sought thee. They poured out prayer when you were rebuking them. Tzakun. You'd expect Yatzku. Yatzak is to pour out. But there's a bi-form, an alternate form of Yatzak, which is Tzuk. So you'd expect Tzaku, except here it looks like it's Tzaka, Tzaku, because of the accent. And the Nun is very ambiguous. You have Nuns sometimes in the imperfect. You have, Tishmeru. You could have Tishmerun in the so-called future. But in the perfect, the so-called past, you almost never have, you don't have Achalu, Achalun. You very occasionally have it. Velo yadun abotecha. So here you see, it seems to be tzaku plus n, but the poets took this as a noun meaning prayer. The lud tzakunam hisketa, you heeded their tzakun, their prayer. This weird verb has turned into a noun. Incidentally, there are Bible scholars who think it was a noun all along, and that it's a weird noun in Isaiah. But the importance is, in Piyut, it's a noun. Tzakun, you heeded their tzakun, their prayer. Hisketa, do you remember this word? In lecture 2, slide 34, in the Meḥayyé, we had solalim sechot shavatam. They lift them, or whatever solalim meant, so that their prayer will be heard, to hear. And we saw that it is a hapax legomenon, a word that appears once in the Bible. Hasket, ushma Yisrael, listen and hear. Oh, Israel, we talked about the modern Israeli word taskit, a radio play. So you listened to their prayer. But hisketa, you'd expect hiskata. The tav is part of the root. It's not sacha, to see, another common word in Piyut. It's sachat. So you wouldn't expect hisketa, you'd expect hiskata, where you've got two tavs, one tav of the root and one tav of the ending. Never mind the final hay at the end that's silent and can be there or not. I have it in parentheses. But you'd expect the tav of the root sachat to get absorbed into the final tav and its presence to be indicated with a dagesh. So not hisketa, but hiskata. But that's not how the poet conjugates it here or elsewhere. Yevon already noticed this years ago, as Shulamit Elitzoris pointed out to me. Good. Beneshek l'rosham sakota. In the presence of weapons, you covered over their heads. What's going on here? So when they left Egypt, you covered them with the ananei kavod, with the clouds of the kavod, which gave protection from weapons. Where do we see that? Well, there's a verse though whose language it's using. Adonai Elohim Adonai Ozishuati Isakot Roshi Biyom Nashek. O Lord, stronghold of my victory, thou hast covered over my head in the day of weapons. Right? Sakota, you covered. It's that same root of covered, which is the root of the word sukka and sachach. You covered my head, biyom nashek. So three of those words are in the line. Sakota in the verse and in the line. L'roshi, l'rosham, biyom nashek, beneshek. When is this referring to? Is this just general, that the Ananei Kavod were a divine protection against weapons? Or is this referring to a specific incident? So in Parasha Hariti Sukkot, in Psikta Rav Kana, we've talked about Psikta Rav Kana in previous shiurim. Psikta Rav Kahana is a work of midrash organized around the special readings for the special occasions, the special holidays, and special Shabbatot. Now, in one manuscript of it, MS Paris Alliance Israelite H47A, which was previously in Safed in Tzfat, so it's called manuscript Tzadi for Tzfat in Mandelbaum's edition, and it also served as the basis for Buber's edition in the 19th century. There is an extra chapter for Sukkot. There's the regular homily, the regular sermon for Sukkot, which talks more mainly about lulav, which we looked at when we were looking at the Magen. But there's another one which focuses more on the mitzvah of Sukkah, on the concepts related to Sukkah. It only appears in this one manuscript. And Mandelbaum writes that it's clear from its language that it does not belong to the original Psikta. It's unclear where it comes from. It's later. And only appears in this one manuscript. Nonetheless, we see traditions in it that we see Rebbe Lazar Rabbi Hilir quote. Was he familiar with this text? I mean, it seems to be late. It seems to post-date him. Was he familiar with this particular tradition in it? We can't know. But let's read it. O Lord, stronghold of my victory, thou hast covered over my head on the day of weapons. That's the verse that we saw. Where were the Israelites? Maybe the where were the Israelites when Pharaoh's mobs were casting arrows at them? God surrounded them with the clouds of the kavod and covered over them. When must this be? This must be at that night preceding the splitting of the sea, because it's only that week that the clouds first start appearing. Back in Egypt, they didn't have the clouds. And after the crossing of the sea and the drowning of the Egyptians in the sea and the song of the sea, they did not have Pharaoh's mobs casting arrows at them. So it must be that night. God surrounded them with the clouds of the kavod, and covered over them. There's that root, samach kaf kaf again, cover over, like a sukka. They could not harm them. And thy cloud stands over them. Therefore it is said, thou hast covered over my head on the day of weapons. So the verse in Psalms is referring to this incident. And so this midrash associates that verse in Psalms with the Ananei HaKavod. Associated with the clouds of the kavod, does it make sense that the Kiliri is drawing on a related tradition? Could be. In which case, he'd be referring to that night of the crossing of the sea. Now, another midrash, quite possibly even later, this midrash is from high medieval Europe, B'midbar Rabbah, and associated somehow with the elusive Moshe Hadarshan in Provence in the 11th century. So this is a whole section which is devoted to explaining the offerings of the 12 Nisi'im, the 12 chieftains, on the 12 days of Hanukat HaMizbeach, the inauguration, the dedication of the altar and the tabernacle of the Mishkan. We read these on Hanukkah, and each day it says another one of the chieftains, another tribal chieftain came and offered, and it gives his contents of his offering, which are all exactly the same as each of the other ones. So in B'midbar Rabbah, it's the one place where someone has decided to try to find significance in each and every one of them and associate them with the given tribal chieftain. So in the section describing the offering of the chieftain of Ephraim, Ephraim being the son of Yosef, on the 7th day, it says the 7th day, this was the Sabbath. They started bringing their offerings on Sunday, and the 7th day was the Sabbath. Normally, you cannot bring a private sacrifice on Shabbat. So it goes ahead and tries to derive from verses that Joseph observed the Sabbath already before it was given in Egypt. And then it says, when you do something ahead, then God gives it back to you. Joseph observed the Sabbath already in Egypt, and therefore God gave his descendant, Elishama ben Amihud, chieftain of Ephraim, the permission to offer a private offering on the Sabbath, what's not usually allowed. And so to demonstrate that when you go ahead and do something, God gives it back to you, it cites the story of Abraham and the angels. Now, we already saw this idea. So this idea of Abraham having the angels sit under the tree and being given in turn the clouds of the kavod is an old one. We saw it already at the time of Tanaim, already by the 3rd century CE. But here they're going to do something further with it. All actions that Abraham performed for the angels, God paid back to his descendants when they left Egypt and will give them in the future. Regarding Abraham, it says, relax under the tree, meaning that he made them a sukkah. What? Eitz in Hebrew can mean wood, not just tree. So I think this is reading relax under the tree as relax under the wood of the sukkah. Abraham made them a sukkah. He didn't just say, lie under the tree that's in front of my tent. And in turn, God made Sukkot for his descendants when they left Egypt. I had the Israelites dwell in Sukkot. And then further on in the land of Israel, thou hast covered my head on the day of weapons, that God then gave them not just at the time of the Israelites in the wilderness, but also further on, God further gave coverage, further sukkah. Biyom Nashek, on the day of weapons. What's that? Mahu Biyom Nashek. Biyom Ziyunam Shalamed Alaf Malachim. On the day of the armaments of the 31 kings at the time of Joshua, when they entered the land. And how do we know also about the future? V'sukkah tichya letzel yomam. Sukkah will be a shade by day. Havei mi hiktimani mashalein. And then thus, when one gives ahead, when one anticipates and does something good in advance, God will pay back to you. Just as we saw so we see that with Abraham, we see that with Joseph, in that he observed the Sabbath in Egypt, and God gave back by allowing his descendant to offer on the Sabbath. 31 kings, by the way, is a list in the book of Joshua. This is a scroll of the book of Joshua, and you can see here, these are the kings of the land whom Joshua and the Israelites smote, and there's this list, and you can see it's written in this visually stunning way in the scroll used for Haftarot, and not just, it's a scroll, the whole book. This itself is not a Haftarah. When you read the Haftarah, though, if you read a Haftarah from Joshua, you're at least ideally read it from a scroll with the entire book of Joshua on it. So you see here, Melech Yericho Ehad, Melech Ha'ai Asher Mitzad Beit El Ehad, one, king of this, one. It looks like a tally, and at the bottom, all the kings, Kol Melachim, Shloshim Ve'ehad, all the kings, 31. This scroll comes from the Yorkville Synagogue on the Upper East Side, where it's used for the reading of Haftarot. Anyway, this late Midrash, could this be drawing on an old tradition that the Kaleri is referring to? He also associates the verse, Sakot al Roshi B'yom Nashek, with Sukkot. Not directly with the clouds of the kavod. Yes, the clouds of the kavod are at the time of the Israelites in the wilderness when they leave Egypt, and the verse he cites is Kiva Sukkot Hoshavti at Bnei Israel, because I made the Israelites dwell in Sukkot. And then just further to demonstrate that God further covered over and protected the Israelites in reward for Abraham's action, then it cites the verse from Psalms and associates it with the battles with the 31 kings. So what I don't think that the Kaleri is drawing on this as an old tradition. I think rather that the author of the Midrash if he's in 11th century Europe, he has access to the piyyutim of the Kiddleri. I think that this midrash is based on our piyut. Listen, it begins with Abraham. Good. We saw that in the previous stanza we had Abraham. Then in this stanza, we have the sakota l'roshi b'yom nashek. You protected, you covered over my head on the day of the weapons. And then further, it goes on and says, in the future, the sukka will be a shade. And our piyut also looks forward to the rebuilding of the Sukkat David, the David's sukkah in the future, which it understands as the temple. So this connection of the past, present, future connections of the sukkah, and also the very fact that it keeps you talking about sukkah. There's no reason in a homily about the 12 chieftains offering offerings to keep using the language of sukkah. And moreover, we saw that in the Tanaitic sources, the Tosefta and the Mechilta, that talk about Abraham and the angels and what was given back, it doesn't use the language of sukkah. It says, Abraham said, relax under the tree, and God gave back the ananei hakavod, the clouds of the kavod. Here it says, Abraham made them a sukkah, relax under the wood. V'hakadosh Baruch Hu asa sukkot levanav b'yetziatam miMitzrayim. It doesn't say God made them the clouds of glory. It says God made them sukkot. I think the midrashist here, the homilist, has sukkot on the mind. And why would that be? I think because he's basing on our piyut. Now, if that's so, then this can't be a source for a piyut, so this is out. So then what did the Kiddleri mean when he wrote Beneshek l'rosham sakota? Either he was referring to the tradition which appeared in this late addition to the Psikta of the Psikta of Kahana for Sukkot, which, if so, it would be an older tradition that got incorporated into this later text. Or maybe he's just using the language of the psalm because it has that verb sachach, sakota, you covered over, and he's simply talking about the the clouds of the kavod, and saying that you protected them from all harm. Maybe in the time of the Battle of Amalek, even though, as far as I know, there's no midrash that connects the Battle of Amalek to this verse in Psalms, if I recall correctly. But Paitanim use verses all the time. We saw Utshu'ah Barovio 8 from Proverbs here. We saw there was no midrash, apparently he was connecting it to. He's using a biblical verse. We do find, by the way, that the Battle of Amalek had to do with how was Amalek able to attack the Israelites, that he attacked the stragglers who were outside the bounds of the clouds, that the clouds did protect in times, in all the others at the times of Amalek, implying that the clouds were a protection from weaponry. So you have that even without the connection to the verse. In any event, and from rage you spared the congregation. Yeah, you protected from harmful things, including weapons. Doesn't have to refer to a specific midrash or a specific event. What's NF? It's our old friend, the Segolate. Remember the Segolate? Melech, Segol, Sefer, Seira Segol, Ochel, Holam Segol. And that the Paitanim, remember, invented the word Nezel, invented all sorts of new forms based on, Melech, Sefer, and Och are established forms from the Bible, from Hebrew as it's been for thousands of years. But Paitanim created new forms, and F, again, what's the root? Gabichit anaf, the Lord raged against me. Olam te'enaf, wilt thou rage against us forever? When it's a noun, the nun is lost in this form. It's just af, vayicha apo, and his rage flared, like the word for nose. Same word. So what he's doing is he's making a tegolate with the full 3 letters of the root. Instead of af, we got f. We're on the next stanza now. Shivua meshi sikachtam, ba'aninat peres sochachtam. Ta'u kehidek mimasuchatam, b'chein rushafa sukatam. A heptad of garb, Shavua, Presumably, you know the word Shavua meaning week. And in Mishneh Hebrew, you've got Shavua meaning a period of 7 years. So here it's a unit of 7 things, a heptad of meshi, we'll get to that later. You covered over them. Remember, we saw in the Tosefta, also in the Mechilta, which we didn't see directly, that there's not just this one cloud, there are the 7 clouds of the kavod. With clouds spread out, you sheltered over them. When they strayed like a thorn from their hedge, then their sukkah was burned down. What's going on? Verse in Ezekiel 16. Ezekiel 16 is a parable which is describing the history of the Jewish people, the Israelites in Egypt and beyond, as a baby girl who is abandoned, and then God comes over and finds her and clothes her and gives her shoes and ointment and marries her because at that point she has grown up. So one of the things it says is, I draped thee in meshi. So again, you're going to know from modern Hebrew, the word meshi is silk. Problem is, that's not an old definition. That is first known first mentioned in a dictionary by David Alfasi in the 10th or 11th century, 11th, I think. And it becomes widespread. It's picked up by Rashi. But it's not an old meaning, and it's certainly the Kiliri would not have known this understanding of meshi as silk. In the Talmud, there are other words for silk, kalach, or shiarin. What is meshi then? Vachasech meshi. The Septuagint reads, Kai periev alon se trikapto, and I put around a sheer veil, trikapto. Trikapton is the nominative. The Syriac, the Pshita, has Wachasitichi Hilla. I covered thee with a veil. So at least according to these, it seems to be the name of a garment, not a substance. The Targum gives a non-literal translation of the whole verse, trying to get into not the literal parable, but talking on the national level, because the whole chapter is an allegory for God's relation with the Jewish people, right? And the high priest with colorful garments, but again, not a material. What is meshi? So in the Hittite, Mashiach is a veil. An Egyptian, I'm not even going to try to pronounce this, some kind of garment. So Chaim Rabin, Hittite words in Hebrew, says that we don't know which of the two it's from, but it does seem to be a loan word from one of these. It's some kind of garment. I know this all from Dr. Moshe Ra'anan's website with articles about Daf Yomi. Here's the link, and he cites these theories and shows that silk. He mentions that it wasn't identified as silk until the 11th century. So that's not what the Kildare means here. But how would he have understood it? How would Chazal, how would the sages have understood it? The rabbis of the Talmud and the Midrashim. Even if we say that originally it meant some kind of garment in the Bible, but how was it understood? The Midrash reads the words midrashically. Great. The Midrash reads midrashically. It reads it in a non-straight way. Perhaps because they had no idea what the word meant, just as we barely know. Some kind of garment, we think. Midrash Tanchuma Netzava, section 1, Va'achasech meshi. I draped thee in meshi. Elu ananei hakavod. This means the clouds of the kavod, as it is said. Lo yamish amud ha'anan. The pillar of cloud never departed. Yamish. So we see these two consonants, mem, shin, meshi, yamish. Now, the pillar of cloud did not depart, so it's a negative. But nonetheless, somehow, it's understanding Homiletically, it does not give any literal meaning to the word. You can't say it means I covered you with what departed. In fact, because these didn't depart. It means meshi simply means the clouds, and therefore we get heptad of garb or of meshi. Let's really say you covered over them. Now, means the 7 ananei kavod, but it's a difficult line. Instead of shavua, heptad of, many texts read shiva 7. Seems to be a later reading from scribes who found the word shavua difficult. We even find manuscripts where originally the original scribe wrote shavua, and someone has crossed out the vav and written sheva. Instead of meshi, it's a very hard word here, obscure. Some texts read ananei meshi, clouds of meshi. And in fact, most printed texts combine both of these and read shiva ananei meshi sikachnam, which means what? 7 clouds of meshi clouds you covered over them. But we said that meshi means the cloud, midrashically. So ananei meshi can form a simichut nirdafim. This is a phenomenon, a linguistic phenomenon found, you find, I think, a little in the Bible, but you find it a lot in piyyutim, a construct of synonyms. It's not exactly clouds of meshi, but more like clouds, also known as meshi. It's like Am Eidah, the people of the congregation, which means the people, also known as congregation. Hok mitzvah, the law, the commandment. Law, also known as commandment. Zerat se'etza echa, the progeny of your descendants, but it means the progeny, also known as descendants. Ur Eish, in English, we don't even have different words for this. Fire of fire. It means the Ur, also known as Eish, fire, also known as fire. If you have this extra word, which again, as you see, disrupts the meter, which is exactly 3 words per line, it's clearly an addition, but it definitely makes the line more comprehensible to somebody who's wondering, what on earth is meshi and what's it doing here? Meshi clouds that are known as meshi. But now let's see some over-translations below. The Eastern Ashkenazic Machzor printed in Zhitomir in 1848. The Yiddish translation says, Mit 7 Wolken husti sei geringelt, wus sei Sahnen gewesen wie a Sadenkleid. With 7 clouds you surrounded them, which were like a silk garb. Silk. Well, later generations are going to read meshi as silk. It's not what the poet meant. The poet didn't even mean garb, it seems. The poet just meant the cloud. Or the Art Scroll Sukkis Machzor, Brooklyn, 1987, with 7 silken clouds you surrounded them. Sounds very nice, and if you read it, you'd think that the poet is trying to make some point about the softness of the clouds. They're soft like silk, but really not. Really, what's going on is they're over-translating, and you know what? I also over-translated by translating as garb. Because really, is there any evidence that the Kiliri, or for that matter, Chazal, knew the meaning of garb, or they just, you could sort of get it from context in Ezekiel, but it seems with that midrash, meshi equals the ananei hakavod. So that of cloud, note the capital C, that it's not that meshi means cloud. Meshi specifically means the clouds of the kavod. So a heptad of cloud, of the ananei kavod, you covered them. Ba'aninat peres sochachtam, with clouds spread out, you sheltered over them. Okay, it's a reference to a verse in Psalms. Paras anan lamasach ve'eish lahayir laila, spread out a cloud as a curtain and fire to light up the night. This is the psalm is talking about the Exodus and the aftermath and the wanderings in the wilderness, and this verse is referring in context to the ananei kavod. But what the poet has done, he's made a simichut Torah, a construct of description. Ba'aninat peres, it's clouds of spreadage, mean clouds spread out. You sheltered over them with clouds of spreadage. What's spreadage? What's peres? It's another segolate. You see the verb paras, to spread, so he made it peres, a segolate. This is how you see the word vocalized in Ashkenazic Machzorim manuscripts. Later on, for the last 300 years or so, you've seen Machzorim vocalize it as if it's an infinitive bani, not pares, with clouds of spreading, clouds of to spread. You shelter of them because of not understanding the segolate. But that's what's going on here, with clouds spread out. And it's alluding to the he spread out clouds as a curtain. When they strayed like a thorn from their hedge. I'm using the translation that is typical of these biblical verses. Tovam k'chaydek yashar, misucha. The best of them is a briar. The most upright is sharper than a thorn hedge. We don't actually know what these words mean, or at least there's no internal evidence in Tanakh what they mean. And when you look in Chazal, when they define them, the kachedek, they say zachidka, is an Aramaic equivalent of chedek, but when you look in the dictionaries, it'll tell you chidka is a thorn. But when you look, how do we know it's a thorn? They'll cite the statements in the Midrash about this very verse. So it's all very circular, but this is indeed how nearly all the commentaries and translations take it. The Septuagint reads it completely differently. There's something about eaten by a moth. So who knows? And who knows how the Kildiri would have read it. But here, I did not even try to make my own translations of the verses. Here's King James Bible, because it's, the others agree with it. It's a established English translation. You got the verse from Micha, the verse from Mishallesh. The way of the slothful man is as a hedge of thorns, kimsuchat hadek, but the way of the righteous is made plain. So they went stray like a thorn coming out of a briar, a briar coming out of a hedge fence. What's that? If you've got the fence, which is hedging the proper way we're supposed to be behaving, and there's a thorn that sticks out, that means they are going beyond what they're supposed to be doing in a bad way, going beyond, meaning going outside the limits of how we're supposed to behave. Clearly, regardless of how you understand how he literally understands these words, it means when they sinned. Then their sukkah was burned down. What's that? That's the temple. The Beit HaMikdash was burned down. That you covered them, you protected them with the clouds of your kavod during the time of the Exodus, and then it was in the Mishkan, and then from the Mishkan to the Beit HaMikdash. But then when they sinned, their sukkah was burned down. With Rushafa. So in Tanakh, this verb doesn't appear, but you have the noun Rishafeha, Rishpei, shall have it. Yeah, its flames are flames of a great fire, a great blaze. So from that noun, Reshef, Segolate already in the Bible, he makes the verb Rushafa, it was burned down. Why is there sukkah? The temple, we saw this verse. His sukkah was in Salem, in Jerusalem, and his lair in Zion. One more stanza. We've gotten from Abraham and the reward for Abraham at the time of the Exodus and the wilderness wanderings, the temple. Now the temple's been destroyed. Now we have the prayer. Toldot Seir Ta'avid, destroy the line of Seir, so that they will no longer subjugate the master. Givir levilti lahavid, ta'abedeinu ka'az ravid, bedeck us as long ago, as if with a necklace. Bekomamach, Sukkat David, when you restore the sukkah of David. So what's going on? Toldot Seir. What's Seir? Seir is Edom. Vayishav Esav v'har Seir Esav v'Edom ve'idlat od Esav v'Edom v'har Seir. Esau settled in Mount Seir. Esau is Edom. And this is the line of Esau, father of Edom, in Mount Seir. Esau is Edom. Edom is Seir. Edom lives in Mount Seir. And Edom is Rome. See Gerson D. Owens, 1967 article, Esau as symbol in early medieval thought, where he traces how in the Bible, in the book of in the prophecy of Ovadia and in the book of Psalms, it talks about the Edomites, Israel's brethren, mocking when the temple and Jerusalem are destroyed. The children of Edom on the day of the destruction of Jerusalem said, tear it down, tear it down. So they get identified later with the Romans who are the ones who tear down the second temple. The Babylonians, not the Edomites, tore down the first temple. So what are these verses talking about when they talk about Edom taunting at the destruction of the temple? They got understood as referring to the second temple. So Seir equals Edom equals Rome. Now, because of this line gets heavily censored later on, because Jews are living in Christian monarchies and Christian empires, which are all understood both by the Jews and the Christians as successor states of the Roman Empire. Destroy the line of Seir. He's actually living under the Eastern Roman Empire, the so-called Byzantine Empire. It's the Roman Empire. They didn't call themselves Byzantine Empire. That's modern, I think, German historians invented that. But they called themselves the Roman Empire. Ta'avid, destroy them. What's the time out? We talked about prophecy of Ovadia. I will destroy. Same word, ha'avadti, sages from Edom. Incidentally, you see ta'avid, givir levilti ha'avid, to subjugate ta'avid, which in many pronunciations of Hebrew, and possibly the poet's own pronunciation, are pronounced identically. Ta'avid, to you destroy, ta'avid, or you subjugate, so longer not to subjugate, a pun that seems to occur already in the Torah, where you've got va'avadtem Elohim achirim, and you worship foreign deities. Va'avadtem me'ira me'al haaretz hatova, and you perish speedily from the good land. That va'avadtem you worship, and va'avadtem you perish. Okay, so that they no longer subjugate the master. The master is the Jewish people, because Isaac and Esau are brothers, and their father Yitzchak blesses, not Isaac, Jacob and Esau are brothers. Their father Isaac, Yitzchak, blesses them. Ya'avducha amim v'yishtahavu lecha le'umim ve'gevir la'achecha v'yishtahavu lecha b'rei imecha orarecha arur u'mvarachecha baruch. Peoples will be subject to thee, and you should be a master over your brothers. So the gevir, the master, that is Jacob, and it says the people will be subject to thee. So here it's saying, please make it so that the blessing is not flipped, so that Esau is not subjugating the one who was blessed to be the master, the gevir. Ta'apidenu ka'az ravin, bidekas, as long ago as if with a necklace. Bidekas, how's ta'apidenu bidekas? So in the story of the investiture of the sons of Aaron and his sons as Kohanim, it says that Moses placed these various garments on him. He placed the ephod on him. He placed the tunic upon him. He girded it up in a sash. He clothed him in the robe. And placed the ephod upon it. And he girded it up with the belt of the ephod. He ephoded him with it. See the root aleph pei daled. He ephoded it. But this verb gets used in piyut as to bedeck in general, not just to bedeck with an ephod. So bedekas, as long ago as if with a necklace, as if with, give us back our former glory. The komamach sukat David, when you restore when you erect the sukkah of David. Here, the sukkah of David here clearly being the temple and the Davidic monarchy in general, dominion. Here come the psukim. ככתוב ביום ההוא הקים את סוכת דוד הנופלת וחדרתי את פרציהן והריסותיו הקים ובניתי הקימי עולם. On that day I will restore the fallen sukkah of David, I will repair its breaches, as we saw, bring back as it was. ונאמר וברא אדוני על כל מכון הר ציון ועל מקרה הענן יומם ועשן ונוגה אש להבה לילה. The Lord will create over every home in Mount Zion and all its meeting places, cloud over every glory. We saw this verse. So those two verses referring to the future restored Jerusalem with the sukkah of the temple, the clouds over glory protecting us all. Now we've got, looking back in the verses relating to the past, we've seen this verse as well. He spread out a cloud as a curtain, fire to light up the night, the Ananei HaKavod at the time of Moshe. V'nemar Elohim Adonai oz Yeshuati sakot al roshi v'yom nashek. O Lord, stronghold of my victory, thou hast covered over my head on the day of weapons. And then the final two verses, which are standard. You'll see these in all Kiddush Ta'ot, certainly in Ashkenazic manuscripts and printed editions, earlier in Eastern manuscripts in the Cairo Geniza. You certainly have Va'ata Kadosh, the last one. I don't think you always have Yimloch, but you have these together. These are the grand finale. And indeed, I don't know if I've mentioned that in modern times, these verses that are recited between the parts of the Kiddush Ta'ot do not get recited. They're not printed in non-scientific modern Machzorim. But these last two are. They are both printed and recited. And they form the conclusion going ahead, which will get us to the next sections of the Kedushta. Because unlike at the end of the Magen and the Meḥayyé, where there was a churuj, a closing stanza getting us to the end of the bracha, there is no end of the bracha here, because we're not going straight to the conclusion of the bracha. We're going to expand with at least 5 more piyyutim. And then we're going to go into Kedusha, and only at the very end will we get to the conclusion of the bracha. But at least these verses have to do with, kingship and holiness. May the Lord reign forever, thy God, O Zion, for all generations. Hallelujah. And that kingship, and thou art holy. Holiness enthroned upon the praises uttered by Israel. Then these last two words, what is this? It says, El na, God please, or God now. They may go with the next piyyut 4, which we'll look at in next shiur. But they're recited typically with the previous line. It's not clear what's going on, and they sort of occupy this liminal position, this sort of threshold position between this part of the Kedushta and the next. I just want to play. You'll hear Tzvi Granatov chanting these last two pesukim from not from this Kedushta of Sukkot, but from a Kedushta for Shabbat Parah, the third of the special parashiot in the month of Adar before Pesach. Kadosh. And here we are at the end of shiur number 3.